Picture this, a dense emerald green jungle, alive with a symphony of a million unseen creatures. This is the heart of Malaysia, one of the world's most biodiverse hotspots. But for years, a shadow of doubt loomed over these ancient rainforests. International conservation groups, particularly from the United States, were skeptical. They looked at the rapid development, the sprawling palm oil plantations, and asked a pointed question: is Malaysia truly protecting its wildlife, or is it all just for show? The narrative was simple and, frankly, a little condescending. The West, with its established national parks and billion-dollar conservation budgets, was positioned as the expert, the judge. Malaysia, a developing nation striving to balance economic growth with environmental responsibility, was the student under scrutiny. Reports were published, conferences were held, and the underlying message was clear: Malaysia isn't doing enough. The iconic orangutans, the majestic Malayan tigers, the elusive clouded leopards, all were supposedly on a fast track to extinction, victims of neglect and corporate greed. American scientists, armed with satellite imagery and grim statistics, painted a bleak picture. They saw deforestation and assumed the worst, often without spending enough time on the ground to understand the full story. Their models predicted ecological collapse. Their articles warned of an impending empty forest syndrome. The pressure was immense. It was a classic David versus Goliath story, but in this version, David was being told he didn't even know how to use his slingshot. The world was watching, and the verdict seemed pre-written. Malaysia was failing. But what if the story wasn't that simple? What if the view from a satellite thousands of miles away missed the most crucial details? The Malaysian government and local conservationists were frustrated. They knew the challenges were real. No one denied the threats posed by poaching and habitat loss. But they also knew about the tireless work happening behind the scenes. Far from the international headlines, they knew about the dedicated rangers patrolling deep in the jungle, the indigenous communities acting as guardians of their ancestral lands, and the innovative conservation strategies being developed right here in Malaysia. They decided it was time to change the narrative, not with words, but with undeniable proof. They extended an invitation. Come, they said to their American counterparts. Come and see for yourselves. Leave your assumptions at the border and walk with us into the jungle. It was a bold move, a gamble. If the critics were right, it would be a public humiliation. But if they were wrong, it would be a game changer. The invitation was accepted. A team of leading American ecologists and wildlife biologists, skeptical but curious, packed their bags for Southeast Asia. They expected to find a devastated landscape. They expected to confirm their data. They had no idea they were about to have their entire worldview turned upside down. The journey began in the state of Sabah on the island of Borneo, often cited as ground zero for deforestation. The American team, equipped with state-of-the-art GPS trackers, drones, and a healthy dose of skepticism, joined a Malaysian wildlife survey team. Their first mission was to assess the health of the orangutan population, a species everyone agreed was under severe threat. The prevailing wisdom was that orangutans couldn't survive in logged or fragmented forests. The Americans expected to find only small, isolated groups clinging to survival in pristine reserves. For the first few days, their predictions seemed to hold true. They trekked for hours, seeing plenty of evidence of logging, both old and new. The jungle was not the untouched paradise of storybooks. But then something strange happened. A local guide, a man from the Orang Sungai or River People community, pointed high into the canopy. "Look," he whispered. There, swinging gracefully through a tree that was clearly secondary growth, was a mother orangutan with a baby clinging to her back. The Americans were stunned. According to their models, she shouldn't be here. This wasn't a primary forest. Over the next few weeks, the surprises kept coming. They found orangutan nests, not just in the protected forest reserves, but in acacia plantations and mosaics of small farms and regenerating jungle. It turned out the great apes were far more resilient and adaptable than previously believed, capable of using human-altered landscapes as corridors to move between larger forest patches. This wasn't something you could see from a satellite. You had to be there, on the ground, talking to the local people who saw these animals every day. The Malaysian scientists explained their strategy. It wasn't about creating isolated fortress parks. It was about creating a network of interconnected habitats, a forest mosaic that allowed both wildlife and people to coexist. This included designated wildlife corridors, replanting native fruit trees along riverbanks, and working with plantation owners to set aside high conservation value forests. It was a pragmatic, nuanced approach born from local realities, not from a textbook written thousands of miles away. The American team started to realize that their black-and-white view of conservation, pristine versus destroyed, was far too simplistic for the complex realities of Southeast Asia. The next phase of the expedition took them to peninsular Malaysia, into the heart of tiger territory. The Malayan tiger is critically endangered, with estimates of fewer than 150 left in the wild. This was where the American scientists expected their worst fears to be confirmed. The international narrative was that poaching was out of control and the tiger's prey base had been decimated. They joined a patrol of Malaysian rangers and members of the indigenous Orang Asli community. This wasn't a staged tour for visitors. This was a real 10-day anti-poaching patrol. Deep in the Taman Negara National Park, the terrain was brutal: steep ravines, leech-infested streams, and suffocating humidity. Within the first 48 hours, the team found and dismantled a poacher's snare line. The rangers, using tracking skills passed down through generations, moved with a speed and certainty that left the visiting scientists in awe. These weren't just government employees. They were protectors, warriors for the forest. They showed the Americans how they used camera trap data, not just to count tigers, but to predict poacher movements and intercept them. One of the American biologists, a specialist in predator-prey dynamics, had brought along his own camera traps. He was skeptical that the prey base was sufficient to support a viable tiger population. He and his Malaysian counterparts set up dozens of cameras in a grid pattern. They waited. A month later, the data came in. The American scientist sat in a rustic field station, scrolling through thousands of images. His jaw slowly dropped. Not only were there images of the elusive tigers themselves, including a mother with cubs, but the sheer abundance of prey animals was staggering. Sambar deer, wild boar, barking deer, even the shy tapir, the forest was teeming with life. His own data was refuting his long-held assumptions. He turned to the head Malaysian biologist and said, "I don't understand. Our models, based on the level of forest fragmentation, showed this shouldn't be possible." The Malaysian biologist smiled. "Your models don't account for our rangers. They don't account for our informant networks in local villages. And they don't account for the will of our people to save our national symbol." This was the shocking truth. Active, on-the-ground protection was trumping the predictive power of deforestation maps. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when the team visited a marine park off the coast. The global story about Malaysia often focuses on its rainforests, but its marine ecosystems are just as vital and, according to some reports, just as threatened by pollution and overfishing. The American team, now humbled and far more open-minded, went on a dive with local marine biologists. They were braced for bleached coral and sparse fish populations. Instead, they plunged into a kaleidoscope of color and life. Huge schools of jackfish swirled around them, sea turtles glided past, and the coral reefs, while showing some signs of stress, were vibrant and resilient. What was the secret? The park manager explained their community-based approach. Local fishermen, who once practiced destructive blast fishing, had been retrained as tour guides and reef guardians. They now had a direct economic incentive to protect the very ecosystem they once harmed. The government had established no-take zones, but it was the community's buy-in that made it work. It was a powerful lesson. Conservation wasn't just about fences and laws. It was about people. It was about providing alternative livelihoods and making local communities the primary stakeholders in protecting their own natural heritage. As the 6-week expedition came to an end, the American scientists gathered with their Malaysian hosts for a final debrief. The atmosphere was completely different from the tense skepticism of their arrival. One of the lead American ecologists stood up. "I came here expecting to write a report confirming what we thought we knew," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Instead, I have to rewrite everything. We've been looking at Malaysia through the wrong lens. We've been judging you by our standards, using our metrics, without understanding the unique challenges and the innovative solutions you've developed." He admitted their satellite data had told them what was lost, but it never told them what was being saved, what was adapting, and what was being actively protected. The real story of conservation wasn't in the pixels of a satellite image. It was in the footprint of a ranger, the nest of an orangutan in a regenerating forest, and the pride of a former fisherman showing a tourist a healthy coral reef. Malaysia wasn't perfect, and the threats were still very real. But it was fighting back with a cleverness, a resilience, and a community spirit that the outside world had completely failed to see. The result wasn't just a handful of surprising discoveries, it was a profound shift in the understanding of how conservation can and must work in the 21st century. The student had become the teacher. The world thought it knew Malaysia's story, but it turned out it had only read the cover. The real, shocking, and ultimately hopeful story was hidden deep within the jungle, waiting to be discovered. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as eye-opening as we did, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more content that challenges the way you see the world. See you next time.